Welcome to day 20 of our challenge. Today we will make a huge step forward and switch over from in-memory database to SQL. So without further talking, let's get started. Okay, now let's install an SQL Server Express 2019. So simply search for it on Google, for example, but you can also for sure find the link directly in the description. And let's pick that, Microsoft SQL Server 2019 Express. It's completely free. So let's just move to that page. When you scroll a little bit down, you can see here the download button, right? So Microsoft SQL Server 2019 Express. Let me click on download. Okay, so after it gets downloaded, should just take some seconds. Go ahead and click on basic to install it, right? So simply accept the license agreement. Now pick a place where you want to install that SQL server. Let me just install it here. Now let the installation run through. Now after the installation is done, you can find SQL Express right here. So this is a connection string. We will cover that later on again. What I want you to do now is, first of all, that's the proof that SQL server is now installed. Go ahead and install SSMS, because we can create a user, which we will need later on using SQL. But this is really not what this course is about. So we will use UI instead, and SSMS is a GUI for, well, taking care about databases from Microsoft side. So go ahead and install SSMS right now. It should open up that link here. Download SQL Server Management Studio. Simply go ahead and click here on free download for SQL Server Managed Studio. Okay, so once it's downloaded, go ahead and install that too. So the installation is very simple of SSMS. Just click one time and let it run through. And afterwards you can come back here if you, well, haven't closed it now. So you can close it for sure now. Great. So now open up SSMS. So search for SQL Management Studio. Right, so Microsoft SQL Server Management Studio 18 and open it up. And now go ahead and click browse for more, for example, database engine. You can see I got that right here. So simply click on OK and then click on connect. And for you, it might already has been pre-selected, right? So now we need to create a database at first. So right click on databases and create a new database. Now pay attention. We have to name it exactly like this because we will reference it later on. Call it flights. So with an S in the end, flights. There we go. Now click OK. You can see the flight database here, and we will come back here later again to create a user, which we can then use to log in. Awesome. So now let's first of all add a new package to our application here, because we need to make use of Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL package, SQL Server package, however. So go to Tools on the top side, NuGet Package Manager, and then Manage NuGet Packages for Solutions. And now search for Microsoft .entity framework core.sql server. There we go. And it's the first one here, Microsoft Entity Framework Core SQL Server, right? So check our project and hit install. Give it some time and then accept the license here. And now it's installed. So what we do next is we go into our program.cs, and you can see that we have, if you scroll a little bit down, that add DB context right here configured with options in memory, right? So you got that in line 10 for me. Now, this use in memory database, we will now replace it with use SQL server, right? And that's now available for us. We can simply go ahead and remove that database name right now. We don't need it anymore. Okay, and that's all what we're gonna do. So now go ahead and start the application in debugger mode, and you will be able to see just in a second that we will face an exception. There we go. So this exception happens right after trying to seed the database, right? So remember that we got the entities here, random flights to seed, right? This is the information we want to get into the database. And then we take entities, save changes, so where we save the database. And here he is throwing an exception. A relational store has been configured without specifying either the DB connection or connection string to use. So that totally makes sense, right? We have made use of SQL Server now, but we didn't specify any connection string or any other information. So now let me explain you what exactly we have to do next. The SQL Server database engine is a data source that's hosted on a machine. The data source can contain multiple databases. To connect to a database, we need to have the credentials of the database, a user ID and the password. The database engine is actually a service over the network, so like any other application, it has an IP address and it listens to a specific port. So after installation, SQL Server Database Engine listens to port 1433 by default. The instance contains a database with the name flights. To connect to the instance, we use the SA as the user ID and the 1234 exclamation mark secret as the password. Once we have that information, we must concatenate them as a single string and format them like this. This string is called a connection string. To connect to a database, we should pass the connection string to Entity Frameworks SQL Provider. Great. So now let's set up our connection string and connect to our SQL server. So let's scroll up here a little bit and just continue what we started, right? So here, a little bit more above in line 10, we use the SQL server. Now let's get started what we have learned in the last presentation about the connection string. So let's write one down here. You can later on place the connection string somewhere else, but for now we keep it simple, write it down here. So data source is equals to, let me just zoom in a little bit. Data source equals to localhost, right? So my local machine, the computer I'm sitting in front of, 1433. Next up, we can also write everything down in one string, right? But we can also concatenate them. Let's go ahead and database equals to flights. Again, semicolon. Next one, user ID. It has to be exactly written down like this, so it's case sensitive and everything, so don't write it together. Use user space ID exactly like this, and password equals to 1234 secret. And there we go. So this is just defined by us, right? We can also go ahead and use a different user ID and password for sure. Awesome. So this is what we have right now. We have that use SQL server inside of the options. So we use the options, and inside of the options we define the SQL server with a specific connection string. Okay, so now we need to pay attention, because when we first of all save something to the database, we got that here. Here we get our flights, which we want to add, right? So here we use entities, and we grab that entities from our service scope. So what that means is actually entities is our database. So entities.database, let's make sure that it is created. So ensure created, right? Use that method and see, ensures that the database for the context exists. So it only makes sense to save something to the database and to not get any errors if we make sure that the database even is existing. Great. So that's the first thing that we have additionally to add. Now scroll up again and you can see that service lifetime singleton here, right? We use that for our in-memory database, but for a SQL server, we don't need that. So remove the service lifetime of the database, right? So as I said, we had to share a single instance of the entities class to all requests just because we used the in-memory database. Now we don't want to share transactions across all requests when we persist that data in a SQL database. Great. So once we shut down the application, our database is not gone. So this is where we don't have to use this lifetime anymore. Let's talk about that a little bit more in detail now. When you choose the singleton service lifetime for service, the service collection creates a single instance of the service when the first client requires it. So since we have chosen the singleton as the service lifetime, service collection keeps the service instance in memory as long as the application runs. Service collection doesn't dispose the instance of the service after disposal of the client class. Whenever a new client requires the service, service collection injects the existing instance rather than creating a new one each time. Singleton lifetime can be a proper solution for some use cases, but the instance should not be shared with all clients many times. So consider the entity service. Booking controller requires an instance of the entity service, for example. Web API creates a new controller instance for each request. Since we had added the entity service as a singleton to the service collection injects a single instance of the entities class to all controllers. Since a request should not be able to save changes of other requests, sharing the entity service instance across all requests is not a good solution. A better alternative is to create a new instance for the entities class per HTTP request and disposal of the entity service instance on the disposal of the request. Consequently, a request can only save the changes made to the entities by itself. It cannot save the changes made by other requests. And that's exactly what the scoped service lifetime is doing. Call-in add DB context entities adds the service to the collection with scoped lifetime by default, so you don't need to pass the scoped service lifetime to the add DB context method. Great, so this is definitely some in-depth knowledge about singleton and scoped service lifetime. To make it very short again, service lifetime singleton has one instance that gets shared between all requests, and service lifetime scoped creates a new service or new instance of it every time we get a new request and it gets disposed in the moment where the request also gets disposed. Awesome. So now let's move on. Great. So now two things are left to do. First of all, we need to make that connection string working. We need to do some, additional steps for this. And we could make our life very easy, but I really want to go ahead a little bit more into details when it comes to, users and ports and all of that, so that you're really prepared for different scenarios. And as you have learned in the last video, we go ahead and take that builder service add singleton entities. We change that from being a singleton, change it to be of type scoped, so that we have a new entities instance for each request. Great, so this is all we have to do inside of the project for now. Let's switch over to SSMS again. So in SSMS, the first thing that we have to change is right click on the server, go to properties, go to security, and first of all, enable the authentication for SQL Server and Windows, so that we make SQL Server enabled, that we set it to enabled, right? So this is the only way that we are able to connect from Visual Studio from code in that scenario. So definitely go ahead and check this. This usually happens or is unchecked when you make a fresh installation of SQL Server. Go ahead and click OK. Now, after restarting the server, I will show you in a second how you can do that. The effects will take place. Now we will create a brand new login. So go ahead and open up security, here logins, right click new login. So we will register a new account, which is what you want to do later on pretty much very often or regularly. And I want to show you how you can do it. So now choose your, login name, whatever you want to have. For me, it's for example, SA Yannick. So server admin Yannick, for example. Now tick SQL Server authentication and write down a password. Take this password if you like, because this one here has the policy 1234 exclamation mark capital S secret, right? So capital S in the word secret. Now let me just paste that here 2 times. And now go ahead and make sure that you uncheck enforce password expiration. Very important, because if you don't do that, you will not be able to log in from SQL because you first have to change your password. Great. Now default database, go ahead and change it to flights. So again, for this page, set a name, set it to SQL Server authentication, write down a password, untick enforce password expiration, and then select default database. Now on the left side, server roles, select sysadmin. So we give this user really high permissions. Now on user mapping on the left side, tick our new database flights and give him the rights as DB owner so that we are able to read and write data. Great. This is all we have to do. Now click on OK. Go ahead and open up the SQL Server Configuration Manager. You can search for this, SQL Server Configuration Manager. You should have it installed already because it got automatically installed when you install the SQL Server. Now, here under SQL Server Services, you can see all the running SQL servers. This is the one we are looking for, and we can right click and restart. But before we do that, on the left side, check for SQL Network Configurations, go to Protocol for SQL Server Express, right? And you can see here TCP/IP, and we need to enable it. So right click, enable, right? Again, right click, properties, go to IP addresses, scroll to the very bottom, and here you can find your port, 53006. I will copy that now. This is the one for me. So if you have a different one, copy your one. So this is how you can find your port. Now, let me click OK. We needed to enable TCP/IP to be able to use the port to connect to it. So make sure it's enabled. Now go to SQL Server Services, right click on your running server and hit restart. And this may take a small while. Okay. Now let's switch back to our project. We need to adjust our connection string now. So data source localhost. Right, I got that. Now I will put in my new port. 53006 was for me. User ID, I changed that to SA Yannick, right? That's the account I created, and I kept the password. So 1234 exclamation mark secret with a capital S. That was it for me. Now I can save this, and I want to go to View here and then open up SQL Server Object Explorer. Now open up your SQL server. You can find the name in SSMS. So here you can see the name of your server. So remember that name and find it here in that list. That's the one for me. Now you can see the database here already. Great. Now let me hit start. Okay, so I can see that everything is running. The application is starting, right? So I got that here on that screen, but that's fine. I will just shut it down for now again, because that's all we needed to do. You can see on the left side, when I now update everything, so just hit refresh, then open up flights again. There we go. You can now see when I open up tables that we have two tables, right? We have DBO flights and DBO passengers. And do you remember the point where we said that we want to seed flights, right? We got that array here of flight data and we're seeding it. Well, take a look, right click on it, view data, and you can see this is real SQL data inside of an SQL database. Now, if we start the application, we will see it again. And if we start the application 10 times, we will have 10 times the same information, right? Because we should only seed one time, because every time we start the application, we will now seed, which leads, well, to a lot of data, duplicated data in the end. So in the next video, we will take a look on how we can fix this and proceed from there. But however, in this video, you have learned how you can set up a database, a user, how you can unlock TCP/IP and enable it, and then finally connect from SQL. So this is really a lot of knowledge that you will need later on. So now, as I said, every time we start the application, we will seed the database. Now, just think about that our database is now a persistent file, right? This is a simple DB file on your machine, on your local machine right now. So the data is persistently created, not gone when you just shut down the application. So every time you start the application, we will just push those flight seeds to the database, right? So it's an array with a lot of flight information. And for sure, if you now 10 times shut down and start the application, you will have 10 times exactly this information inside of your database. So it's duplicated, or it's got duplicated a lot of times. So what we do there is pretty simple. We only want to seed the initial information one time. So let's go ahead, use these entities here, and let's check if we have any flights. So if entities, so now let's check if we don't have any flights. So if no entity dot flights dot any, right? So it's a Boolean expression. So if we don't have any flights, we want to execute some code. Let me take that flights to seed here. And here we go. These 3 lines of code, right? I got that collapsed or folded. It's flights to seed, add to range, or add the flights and save the changes. I will just copy that, bring it inside here. It will automatically unfold the array again. Let me just collapse it again so that it looks exactly like this. Flights to seed array, add it to the flights, save the changes in database only if we don't have any flights, right? So if we don't have any flights, we can assume that we are creating a new database, for example. Great, and that's all we have to do. Now I want to show you how you can remove a database. So again, let me just open up the SQL Server Object Explorer. It just takes a second. And when I open up the correct SQL instance, I can go ahead here on flights. So you can right click on it and delete, for example, right? But then you have to go ahead and create a new one if you like. So make sure that the database is existing, or what you for sure also can do is simply go ahead and take the flights table and delete that one and the passenger one, because it will automatically get generated again. Or right click on it and view data and simply go ahead, take all the information and right click and delete. That's also working, right? So no problem at all. Great, so now we have our flight data again cleaned. So let me start the application to ensure that our new data is getting seeded now one time, not many times, right? So this is also something you will face in a real world application. It depends on the application. If you seed initial data, mostly these are accounts like in a super admin account or a manager account, right? So by default, or in most scenarios, you are seeding user information. Great, so let me just update everything here. So I can see on my second screen that the application is now starting, and you can see that we now have the information here inside. So let me shut down right now and let me just start again. We could for sure also go ahead and debug, but I just want to show it here inside of the database. So I just started the application. That should take another couple of seconds, and afterwards we should not see any copies of all the information that we get right here, because we are only seeding one time. Okay, so application starting, and when I update, I can see that there are only the entries which were seeded from the previous call. Great. Okay, so this works. Now we only seed the information one single time. Great. So SQL server provider and in-memory database provider are different from each other. Now the result is, after switching, when we now search for flight and we want to book one, let me just book a flight here. You will see that afterwards our list of our bookings will be empty. So I will log in now and book one. You can see my bookings is empty, right? So this is now an issue and we need to fix it, and that's just a single line of code because we just need to adjust the mapping. So go ahead now to our entities class, data, entities, and you remember that part here on model creating, right? So here we got our custom mappings. And we need to adjust it a little bit further so that we go ahead and say model builder dot entity of type flight again. Let me just zoom in a little bit, right? So model builder entity flight, and this time we add dot owns many, dot owns many. So one flight has many flight bookings. Great. Okay, now we can save it, and this is our reference. And as I said, that wasn't necessary before because the in-memory database provider is working in a different way than the SQL provider. So if you have previously taken another, challenge or another course on ASP.NET, you might be familiar with the idea of, database migrations. So how you update and downgrade the database. So if you know that and you are wondering why we're doing that here, well, in the end, it's just the same. So even a migration will in the end have that on model creating called, right? So in any way, we need to define how our database is getting mapped if we have special conditions such as, foreign keys. So any constraints, right? So our flight has arrivals, our flight has departures, our flight has reference to many bookings, right? So this is special. These are constraints that we need to define here. So if departure and arrival wouldn't be that complex, so if they would be primitive types, we wouldn't really have to define them here. So this is why you might be wondering, why is it here, right? So we only got that remaining number of seats as a concurrency token because that was required to prevent an issue in our application, right? So, or possible issue. And we have to define the passenger primary key because we haven't specified one like int ID. So this is why we set the primary key to email. Well, and for everything else, those two are just here defined because they're complex data types. And we got the constraint to many bookings. So these are really special elements. So each of them here is not a primitive type. And at least here we got a foreign key or something like a foreign key, which is referencing to many bookings. Great. Okay, so this is definitely some more advanced ASP.NET stuff, right? So all of that mapping, and there are some templates out there if you use an ASP.NET Core MVC default application, or go ahead and implement the standard authentication, then you will get a fold out with migrations and all that stuff, which nearly handles everything on its own for you, which is absolutely amazing, right? But this is really the low-level code so that you can absolutely do it on your own, right? We want to explain you what happens in the background because this is what makes you a great developer. And if you see it in the end and you find an easier way to do it, that's amazing, right? But for now, learn it the way we're teaching it because you will get or gain the most important knowledge. Okay, so now that we have added those bookings, let's go ahead and delete our database. So server SQL Object Explorer, there you go. And then select the flights database, you got that right here. And let's just right click and delete it. And since our account, which we use to log in, has, well, very, very high rights, or he has enough rights to create a database, right? Not only read and write, but also create a database. So let me just delete the backup, I don't need that, and close the existing connection, right? So now our database is gone. Let's just completely start the application. Also, the new model that we have created here now, right, including the bookings, will get applied to that new database. So let's just give it a second until it's completely loaded. And when we now again search for flight and click on book, enter some information, I will be able to see my booking again. So let me just log in and book the flight. And now you can see that when I click on my bookings, that I now have the information here saved again. That's great. Now when you take a look at the application and you open up the flight table database, inside the tables you can now find booking table, right? And that one is new. That happened because we added or entered here our flight constraint to many bookings. And if you view the data, you can now see the flight ID, passenger email, and number of seats, right? So this is the booking information. Awesome. So now the final thing that we need to do is we need to go ahead and definitely exclude in our program.cs. We need to exclude the connection string, that one here right here. We bring that outside of the source code into an app settings JSON file that you can find on the right side in the Project Explorer. So we'll do that in the next video. So now you are nearly done for today. Again, that was a huge day, right? A lot of new stuff to learn. But however, we really want to cover a lot of stuff in that challenge. And believe me, we would have enough stuff for like a 60-day challenge, but that would be like incredible long, right? Great. So rather than hard coding the connection string in our program.cs, we should read it from the application's configuration file. So take a look on the right side. Inside of the main project structure, you should find the app settings.json at the very bottom right above the program.cs. And as I said, or as you can see, this is for sure JSON information. So we can simply go ahead and add a simple new key value pair here. So you can include generate configuration data for applications in that app settings JSON file. Now let's simply do that. There are two things that we have to use here. First of all, let's bring in our connection string. So what we do is we add a new key value pair. So simply add a comma here. And let's go ahead and call that connection strings. You can see it's already pre-suggested. And the first, well, this is an object, right? So the key value pair and the value is a new object. And inside that object, we have another item, which is called flights. So this is the key which we can use to then grab the connection string that I will write inside here. Now let me open up program.cs because I got the information here. And now let me take it like this, that's fine. And I will now paste it inside here and have to clean it up, right? So I will, instead of adding that plus signs, I will make one connection string, one huge one. So now it's also a good practice if you see how to do it. So basically what you will see, long string instead of separated strings that you have to concatenate. So password, secret, there we go. Okay, so now we have one huge connection string. That includes data source, localhost, and port, database flights, user ID, SAGenic, password 1234, exclamation mark, and secret. Awesome. So between all of these variables, we always have a semicolon. Now, this is all we have to do. Let's save it here. Let's switch over to our program again. And instead of writing it down directly inside here, we will now start using the builder configuration. So let me just remove it. And inside use SQL server, we will now call builder.configuration.getConnectionString. And the name of the connection string is flights. So he will now go into that connection strings object, right? This is what the getConnectionString here is doing, that method. And then he checks for a connection string with the key flight and then provides that information afterwards. Awesome. So we got the builder configuration. Now there is a comma, parentheses missing. That's great. So that's awesome. What I will do next is just to have an easy validation, let me just remove the flights database again, because then he will try to seed some information at the very beginning. For sure, as I said, you can also use a breakpoint and whatever. However, when he now tries to make a connection to the database, we can see if it fails or if it works. So if you can read the connection string from the app settings file or if it fails. Great, so let's give it just a moment. And when I now click on search, you can see that we have our flights. So that worked. The new database got created and seeded. So he was able to make a connection to our database. Yeah, and that's awesome. So now we switch completely from in-memory database to a permanently existing real SQL database. Great. And tomorrow we move on and finally implement our search flights filter.